So in this video today, I'm just going to let you know who I am, where I came from, and how I got into astrology, which is probably what people might be wanting to know. As a child, I was very psychic, and I didn't realise what that was. You know, for me, as a little kid, like I'm talking little kid, probably 1, 2, 3 years old, I just thought we shared our houses with other people that sort of walked around off the ground. So some people might find that a bit strange, but for me, it was a fairly common thing, and I didn't know otherwise. My father, who I had no idea at the time had actually studied astrology, but he was also a chiropractor and an osteopath, had sort of used to spend time with me talking, because I used to talk to him a little bit about what I would now know as being spiritual sort of subjects and seeing spirit, for example. He used to come to me and say, look, don't lose this thing, because people used to lose things around the house, for example. He'd come to me and say, where is it? And I would, you know, I was a little kid, usually in bed or something like that, and I'd put my hands over my face like that, and I'd say when I got shapes in my head, that was my interpretation of it, that I'd be able to tell him where those things were, and usually that was quite accurate. But realistically, what happens as a child, you sort of grow out of that, and you get to about 8 years of age, especially as a boy here in Australia, and you become a boy, and you go off and play sport, you go and play rugby, you go and hang out at school, and you do all of those sorts of things. And by the time I was 16, I started to hang around a friend of mine called Robert, and Rob and I used to practice some martial arts at his place. Little did I know that his mother had also been learning astrology for quite some time. Colleen was a lovely, lovely lady, or is a lovely, lovely lady, and very, very smart woman, very, very highly intelligent. Same as Rob, because he's a professor now at Newcastle University. So Rob introduced me to astrology. Basically, I went over to his place one day, and he was looking at this. In actual fact, I've got his original chart right here, and all handwritten and hand drawn and calculated that way. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "That's my astrology chart." And me, being a Capricorn, I looked at it and I said, "Oh, I read about Capricorn. It sounds nothing like me." You know. And he said, "Well, you know, it's probably your rising sign." I said, "What the hell's that?" So there was all this sort of conversation that's going on. And at the time, Rob sort of said, "Have you ever had a chart done?" I said, "No." And he said, "Well," because my first impression was, this is a crock of shit. You know, like, sounds nothing like me. What a joke. I don't even want to go there. And then he turned around and he said, "Well, why don't you have a look at it and do it yourself?" And I went, "Okay." So he photocopied some pages out of an ephemeris, which is the planetary positions in a book throughout the century. Took some photocopies out of the table of houses at approximately when I had to look at. Gave me some blank charts, very similar to what you just saw just a minute ago, and a book on how to calculate it. And it was like, here you go, knock yourself out. Me being highly mathematical, and those who know me, especially from school and stuff, will know that, I sat down on my own accord and worked it all out. And I had a little book. Someone might recognise these sorts of exercise books, and this is literally the original book. And I calculated out where all of my planetary positions were. And in doing so, I literally had to calculate, and you can see the calculations in the back, all by hand. And in doing those by hand, it took me hours and hours and hours to work it all out. And when I finally did my chart and put it on a chart, I then went back and I thought I had a particular moon sign, only to find out that I hadn't corrected everything from Greenwich Mean Time to being born in Sydney. So I did everything right, but the actual calculations were slightly out because I had to adjust it by a time zone. And as a first effort, that's what I did. And then from there, I just went and created chart upon chart upon chart like this. And that one there is of Marilyn Monroe, hand done. And you'll see all the calculations and bits and pieces on the back. If I colour that, you might see it a bit better. So and I did for all my family, all my friends, and pretty much I spent from 16 years of age for the next 3 months just calculating charts every day. I'd find out people's birth times, and I'd just do it and do it and do it and do it. Now, Rob lent me book after book after book, and I took an interest in all forms of astrology because initially I was trying to disprove that it didn't work. And then I found there was something to it, and that's what set me on a journey going that way. So from 16 years of age, from the time I left school, I started this interest in astrology. it was very interesting, and it may have nothing to do with it, but my father passed away when I just turned 17 in early 1984. And from that moment on, I think it was, sort of from that moment on or around that time that I really got stuck more into astrology, only to find out further down the track that not only had my father done astrology, he'd done it with a various number of people, and talking to Colleen, Rob's mum, we worked out that a person that had taught her, my father had actually taught. So, which was a very interesting sort of turn of events to come around, or at least had been involved in teaching her. So I started off on that journey and was very much a self-educated astrologer. Back then there was an astrologer in the Daily Telegraph. I can't even remember who it was. And it was on day, I think it was on page 3, and you'd ring up and you'd get them to do a tape for you and send it out to you. And I remember getting one of those done and listening to it and going, my God, this really is fairly basic. It doesn't tell me anything about me. And I was paying good money for that. So I was a bit disillusioned, and I had lots of my friends constantly asking me, can you do my chart? Can you do my chart? So I'd do their charts. But what I found at that point in time, I just really couldn't interpret them. It's like my brain had absorbed so much information, because in astrology, there is a lot to learn. It is literally the science of human nature. And so therefore I'd look at a chart and stare at it and go, and I'd be going, oh, they got this, and I was literally all over the place. But, so I put it down, and I put it all down for a little while, and I'd probably, by that stage, already done probably 150 charts of people. And I came back to it after about 3 to 6 months, and it's a bit like I picked it up, and all of a sudden it all started to fall into place, and I could start to interpret and see things. It's like all of the information I'd absorbed in 3 to 4 months sort of absorbed into me, and I could actually start to see it. So then what I would do is I started doing readings for people pretty much for nothing. I just used to sit down with someone for a couple of hours and talk to them about their chart, and I found that the accuracy of prediction was there, the analysis of someone's personality, their family, their business, everything else was sort of quite accurate. And I thought, okay, there's more to this. And eventually I was convinced by friends to start charging for that time. So I started charging people, and I had a fairly, I would say, busy schedule doing astrology charts while I was also trying to work and make money, because I really wasn't charging that much money. I think it was like $30 a reading back then, reading, and it could have been an hour, it could have been 2. So I was really undercharging for what my worth was. But at the same time, I didn't see myself as a professional, because I didn't know there was a professional body. And then when I was around 21 years of age, I answered an advertisement in the newspaper and went to the Chiron School of Astrology, or Chiron, depending on how people say it, in North Ryde, and met Chris Turner, and basically decided at that point in time I was going to do a full-time astrology course and get qualifications. During that year, I started teaching for Chris, because I was so advanced anyway, what I knew, that I started teaching first-year students for her as part of that, because I already sort of covered that. But I got my qualifications over the following couple of years, and then started doing talks and lectures for the Sydney Astrological Research Society, the Federation of Australian Astrologers, and also started reading for a number of people, I would say, in the media spotlight at that point in time, because Chris wrote for the astrology columns for TV Week at the time, and she also did Dial the Horoscope, and I used to sit there and on the dictaphone and help do those scripts, and then they would be printed out, and then Chris would go and read them for the Dial the Horoscope sort of scripts, etc., etc. So I had a very good mentor now, and a very good capacity to learn, and I learned other things that I didn't know. Prior to meeting Chris, though, I had ventured off into various forms of astrology. I wanted to know about Vedic astrology and sidereal astrology and the differences between that and the Western systems. I went into astrolocality. I wanted to know about psychodynamics of astrology and psychology. I wanted to know about, mundane astrology, at all different forms and different branches. For those who don't know astrology too well, it's a bit like you do medicine, and then you can specialize in certain areas. And one of the things, mentioning that is very interesting, because I was quite interested in the fact that, Hippocrates, or Hippocrates, if you sound with a Greek accent. He was the father of modern medicine, but he was also an astrologer, which is not really made common knowledge to people these days. They tend to put him as an astronomer, but in actual fact, he was an astrologer first. And said you can't be a physician without knowing the patient and knowing or being versed in astrology. You had to understand what you're treating and who you're treating before you could solve their problems. So that's another interesting fact, but we'll come to that another time. So from here, what I did was I started writing newspaper articles as well. Not newspaper, magazine articles. Those who might remember this particular magazine, especially if you're, I would say, predominantly female, and in the 80s and 90s, or this would have been in the 90s, so this said, I think, 1995, they were the people I had to do, you're talking Luke Perry, Guy Pearce, Ethan Hawke, all these people, and I was expected to do a bit of an interpretation of what their stars are coming up, plus for other people, and that's what it looked like in the actual magazine. And I think at that point in time, they used to call me Luke the Spook Bayley, which I thought was rather interesting. I didn't make up that name myself. So from about 1988, I think it was, through to around 1995, 96, I wrote for 3 magazines. I wrote for Looks, Smash Hits, and Star Magazine here in Australia. And then eventually they sort of petered out. They decided to conglomerate, and I'd sort of left from that particular position as well. So that's what I started doing there. And then in around 1994, I think I spoke at my first international conference based in Sydney. So the FAA held an international conference with international speakers, and I spoke on a topic called harmonics. And the reason for harmonics was I felt that waves and numbers and the interaction of that and frequencies had a lot to do with why we are where we are. And I started to branch off into an astrological sense of looking at why and how astrology works. And I spent a lot of time organising that and talking on that in subjects during that period in my 20s and into my 30s at a lot of, not so much conferences, but talks, Sydney Astrological Research Society, as I said, FAA, things like that. And I started to do a lot more. I also then found myself wanting to know if the planets had a physical effect on Earth. And in order to do that, I needed something in advance. I needed to know something when it was going to happen. I needed to know where it was going to happen. So I had to know the time, the place, that it was of short duration, and it had an outcome. And I couldn't think of anything because I wanted to know if when planets are in specific positions, do they have an outcome? Do they influence? One planet influence more than another? And the answer to that was yes. And the only thing I could find was horse races, which was quite interesting. And then after picking 10 winners in a row, I'm sitting there going, mate, I've got the Da Vinci Code to this one sorted out. Go and put a bunch of money on a horse for a win, and then all of a sudden it loses. But mathematically, that shouldn't happen. So there's something missing, something in what I'm doing is not working. And that set me on another journey, which I've been doing and researching since back in the early 90s. And here we are in 2024. And I've been researching that even further to the point where I'm pretty confident I can pick those winners, but only in certain races, which is a little bit harder because you've got to have the right lineup of everything. And also trying to work timing of things. So I've also been now working at the timing of events, which also works in with, and I hate to say it, but winning money. And so therefore people who gamble, so whether it be, I'm not very good at lotto, it doesn't seem to work for me, but I can go to the poker machines knowing at a certain timing of when to put money in and when not to put money in, and sure enough, I'm way ahead, and I've got a lot of, and we'll go through that in another video another time. So there are interesting symbologies as to how that all comes together, and there is definitely a celestial scientific relationship between the planets and us, because we're all part of the same solar system working the same gravitational field. But if you're scientific and you want to know a little bit more, have a good look into neutrinos and subatomic particles and how they interact. And if only the science community would actually accept that we are actually a spirit in a physical body and not the other way around, then maybe they'd be onto how the planets actually affect us. And that's for another video as well. So my background has been that I've kept in the, at 29, I had my first child, just turning 30. Jordan, lovely young girl now, and I've got a grandson to her, and thanks to her, I should say, and her partner, James. And that sort of put me in a situation where I had to go and make money. I had to join the real world, because astrology itself didn't pay me money in those days, and people were probably still much more skeptical than they are today. So my intention here on this channel will be to help educate, answer questions, simplify astrology into something that is more functional and practical to work with, and hopefully you can join me on this ride and learn a lot along the way. And if you want to know, and I can't survive, I can't give those answers, then I'll definitely put people in touch with those who can. The right sorts of schools, the right sorts of educators, the right sorts of people and mentors for that particular task. I will mention on another note, when I was around 17, 18 again, I had met some people who read tarot cards, and the interesting thing was, after watching how they read it, I picked up the cards and I sort of knew what they all meant. Now, I don't know if that's an intuitive thing. I don't know if that's, some people would say, a past life thing, whether it be some sort of, psychic recognition of some kind. But I also therefore ventured into that as well. And I've also taught tarot and run tarot classes in the past, and written, I've written a book on it, which I may let people have, but they're primarily my notes from my classes, with a bit of an introduction to it as well. So I haven't published it, but it will come at some stage. If you've got any questions, if you want to like this channel, go ahead and do it. Share it around and hit me with as much as you like, and I will make a video on any of the questions that you have along the way. All right, all the best. Thanks.